Hi everyone, Nick here from Conservation Careers and welcome to the podcast. Now, in recent years, business leaders and boardrooms across the globe have put sustainability and environmental targets towards the very top of their priorities. And in response, an industry is forming rapidly to service their needs, both in-house or as consultants, with generalist and specialist roles evolving all the time to keep up with this growing demand. And riding on the crest of this sustainability revolution is today's guest, Tara Mikhael. Now, Tara's work, it covers the sustainability or supply chains at consulting powerhouse Deloitte, where her work seeks to better understand the root and branch ethics of business operations. In this fascinating chat, we talk about the fledging sustainability and climate change profession and the roles it encompasses and the work it's seeking to achieve. We also discuss her own passions and career to date, and Tara shares her advice for people seeking to better understand or to enter the industry. It's a really inspiring and eye-opening and a really fun pod chat. Enjoy.
Hi, Nick. I'm Tara Mikhael, and actually at the moment I am in ethical value chain at Deloitte. Working with clients on the topic of sustainable value chain more broadly.
Right, fantastic. And it's so great having you on the podcast. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
We just had a pre-chat and I was just saying that this is a new area for me. It's a really interesting and exciting and fast evolving area of working in sustainability and working with businesses and the corporate sector. So it's great to have you on the podcast and to be able to pick your brains and to hear your career story as well. Where to start? Let's start with Deloitte, if that's okay, and your employer. It's a name we hear on the press. I've done a little bit of Googling around trying to figure out exactly what Deloitte is, but maybe could you tell us in your own words, who or what is Deloitte?
Yeah, absolutely. So Deloitte is a professional services company. Traditionally, there's kind of key areas of work that they focus on, including tax and audit and consulting and strategy and risk advisory. But definitely, like many other professional services and consulting companies, now really looking to explore how we can support clients on the topic of climate change, sustainability, human rights. So really kind of focusing our efforts to help problem solving within that space. It's a UK company, but also it's a global company. So we've got presence in many different countries and work with clients across different industries and sectors and sizes.
And are you largely consulting then? So you're going into companies request your services, you come in, support them on their specific needs, and you've got a range of services to do so.
Exactly. So kind of what we call them industry or private sector or public sector companies would come to us with a kind of ask or a question, whether that, includes helping them, design frameworks, sometimes helping them look at programs, helping them internally within their own operations, but also externally. So helping them kind of look at sustainability beyond their own operations into their supply chain and broader value chains as well.
Right, interesting. And the area that we're going to discuss today and the area that you're interested to is sustainability. It's climate change and responding to climate change and being future-proof, I guess, this from a business perspective as well. Where's that business coming from, if you like? Are clients asking for that? And if so, why is that on their agenda? Why are they interested in this area?
It's interesting because I've been with the firm for the past 6 years, and I sit in risk advisory. So historically, we've looked at and for me specifically at risks in supply chain and third-party engagements, but broader risks. But because I'm very passionate about sustainability, I've always tried to bring that kind of that social, environmental sustainability lens to our clients, and it's always been interesting for them. But probably there was not enough drivers kind of 6 years ago to push them to put that at the top of the list. So, back then there was probably thinking about GDPR or cyber or financial risks. Yeah. But really in the last 2 to 3 years, it's been just at the top of every executive agenda with an organization. And I think that is the real change, is that sustainability now is sitting in the board, is sitting with executive leadership. And that top-down kind of push to really transform businesses and their supply chain is coming from the head, which really results in change, and which drives organizations to really kind of start their journey towards more sustainable, to becoming more sustainable businesses.
And that's really recent, like the last 2-3 years COVID's 2 years, so it's really in the very recent past, this has reached the top of industries and it's a real priority. What do you think has been that sort of tipping point? I mean, I'm really excited to hear that, genuinely, but what is it because industry leaders are thinking about it more themselves personally? Is it because their customers are demanding it? I don't know. Like, where could that be coming from?
There's really a combination of factors. And you mentioned earlier, Nick, COVID. I think COVID has absolutely kind of shown businesses that they operate in fragile global ecosystems. Yeah. So, today it's a pandemic. Tomorrow it could be unfortunately, a climate disaster. So that just was a wake up call for a lot of organizations to think, actually, do we know where we operate, and do we know what kind of how resilient our supply chains and operations are? So that is definitely, I would say, COVID has pushed a lot of organizations to start thinking and prioritizing this topic. But a few other things, regulation is a big one. There has been in certain industries are more mature than others. So we've seen in financial services, often the regulation is quite strict and more mature than others. But now we're seeing more regulation coming up for fashion and textile, for broader consumer products, for agriculture. So the kind of regulation is definitely a massive driver for organizations, and they all want to be kind of compliant. The other thing is that stakeholders that you've just described, so consumer, but also investor. So we hear a lot of stories of now kind of investors putting a lot of kind of expectations and requirements of the businesses they invest in, and to be putting an environmental roadmap in place, to have commitments, to bring kind of more social and human rights sustainability into the supply chain. So there's definitely investor consumer push. The last thing is just talent. I think a lot of us, and that's why we're speaking today, and I hope a lot of your audiences are in the same bucket, that a lot of people who work in those organizations are demanding and are kind of requiring their values to be aligned to the organizational values, and that is becoming a key kind of talent retention and attraction point for a lot of organizations, to really demonstrate that they understand the kind of challenge we're facing in terms of climate change, and to understand the need for a very quick and kind of serious change, starting with the organization.
It's really fascinating. Yeah. Have you got any examples of businesses that have really pushed this up their own agenda because they're exposed to climate or wider risks, environmental risks? And what maybe changes they've put in place as a result of that have had benefits to biodiversity, people, something else? I don't know.
Absolutely. And again, I think just it will be hard for me to call out names just because of because they're clients. And obviously in here, I'm bringing kind of my own perspective, Nick, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of people within my team and beyond would agree with some of the points we're making. But I can give you definitely examples of just without calling names of organizations and what kind of changes they're making to be aligned. I think if we look at the kind of fashion sector, for example, there's key commodities today that they are heavily reliant on in terms of the kind of raw materials for their final products. So we're calling leather, cotton, polyester itself. So on one side, one of the key things that they kind of where they've seen the biggest ESG impacts, and especially from a biodiversity perspective and deforestation, was more in their supply chain, because obviously this is where some of the key raw materials are coming from. And we think about cotton, we think about water scarcity, we think about maybe a bit broader about palm oil. One of the key things that they've done, and I think that they've recognized, is that they do not have understanding of their supply chains beyond tier one. So when you limit your understanding or visibility of the supply chain to tier one, you're really not going beyond probably UK-based organizations or suppliers. You're not kind of addressing the challenges and what is happening on the ground in the forests in certain areas, or where the kind of really original source and where the smallholders are, where the growers are. So one of the things they've started doing is really start working with technology solutions on mapping out their supply chain. And that is really step one, is go out and understand, where are you buying, who are you buying from, and then kind of start building a relationship with such suppliers and work with them on upskilling them and collaborating with them on innovating towards sustainability. Because, traditionally, I guess there was a lot of compliance-based relationship with suppliers, which means that, you have a code of conduct, you share with them at the beginning of the relationship, and that's it. Whilst now, I think everyone's recognized that there's a need for ongoing monitoring, there's need for a positive collaboration, for upskilling of and support for such smaller suppliers to help them kind of align to our expectations and requirements, and train them up to be able to kind of use more sustainable practices within their businesses. I don't know if that was clear, Nick. Happy to.
I think so. What I find fascinating through that would be, if some big companies kind of, really audit their supply chains and manage to, for want of a better word, sort of clean the supply chain up, then presumably other customers that are also feeding into the same supply chains are gaining that benefit. So multiple businesses can rapidly clean up quite big sectors, I guess, by a few impactors at the top, almost like flagship species, like, important investors. It feeds down and everyone benefits as a result.
Absolutely. That is like the consortium or the community model that something that we bring. It's an interesting one, because the main blocker or limitation for this concept is confidentiality and kind of competitive behaviors, etc. Because what you see is that, whilst I agree with you, there's big players that share probably 70% of the same suppliers, or 60%.
Right.
If you think of the impact they can create by doing things once, instead of 500 organizations going to that same supplier saying, do you have a policy in place? Do you have a code of conduct? Going once and getting that managed centrally. I mean, the principle there is great, and I think the key again limitation to executing against this kind of principle is that kind of alignment between businesses around confidentiality and not losing a competitive edge, etc. But you see it in certain industries, in certain countries are piloting such concepts. I think in Spain there was a whole thing around traceability, and there was a pilot running through the government to bring together some businesses. I think they were focused on leather or cotton, but yeah, I do agree with you. I think there's definitely something to explore there, and I think the key enabler would be technology in that case. Is a place to actually be able to bring it all together and create those protection against any potential loss of competitive edge and brand, etc.
Got you. Yeah, it's really interesting. So what's your particular role then, Tara? What's your job title? I've forgotten it already. Sorry, you said at the beginning. I've got something written down, but it's different what you said. So I'd like to hear that again. But also, like, how do you fit into this concept then? Where do you sit?
It's funny, my job title I think changes so many times. I sit changed so many times. I think I tweak it based on my evolving interest, I would say. But basically, I sit, to try to make it simple, I sit at the intersection of sustainability and supply chain.
Right.
And probably supply chain is limiting it, more value chain. So my work is predominantly focused on how we help organizations to understand their sustainability, that is environmental or social or governance impact, within their value chain. And by value chain, I mean within their supplier relationships, but also with consumers. So the ecosystem of that organization, we look at what is today your impact within that ecosystem, negatively or positively, and how you can actually deliver against your sustainability agenda, against kind of the SDGs and other regulatory requirements, not only within your operations, but within your supply chain. And one of the key things that drew me into this space is that, at the moment, probably for a lot of organizations, 60, 70, maybe 80% of their impact sits out of their operations. And when we go and make commitments about net zero targets, about commitments towards kind of protecting human rights and diversity and inclusion and emissions reduction, etc., we absolutely need to think beyond our own operations. Obviously, there are businesses that are different than others, services versus goods, but a lot of the impacts it's in the supply chain and things that are not visible, if you don't look beyond tier one. Yeah. So that is really where I sit, I would say, is that kind of, I would summarize it in the sustainable value chain support kind of capability.
Yeah, okay. And are you part of a much wider team of people doing similar stuff? Are you a unique individual within the organization?
Yeah, I think we it's interesting because you need to, within that space, we're tapping into different type of skill set. Yeah. So you want the hard supply chain skills there's a supply chain team that we can tap into. Then you need a bit of technology support for some of the data analytics and sometimes solutions. So you tap into the blockchain and data analytics team. Mm-hmm. I sit in our sustainability practice. Mm-hmm. That we work alongside more different teams that can bring all these kind of capabilities together and offer one integrated solution.
Yeah, interesting. And it must be evolving quite quickly, the roles and duties and the sorts of customers, clients you're working with are presumably changing quite rapidly as it gets up the agenda, and presumably your team grows, as the last 2 or 3 years it's so important, then only into the future. Are you predicting a growth in this area?
Absolutely, and that is reflective again. I don't know if we've discussed it in our pre-chat, Nick. Yeah. That is reflective of the market.
Right.
The market is just, at the moment, really there's a very high demand for professionals in the sustainability space, and I know the word sustainability is just so broad that it can encompass a lot of like different skill set and experience, but we've seen interest in different areas of sustainability where you end up, bringing someone in, then they create a team, then that team becomes a whole capability. So it is absolutely evolving. I mean, we talked about maybe briefly circular economy, but then, think of circular economy, it's a massive kind of concept. So we're now kind of recruiting circular economy specialists and biodiversity specialists and natural capital specialists. So definitely, I'm so excited in a way by this, because it feels like there's this place for everyone who's interested in this topic to be working on this at the moment.
Well, that's music to our ears as well, because there's lots of people looking to work in this space, whether they're switchers or starters or whichever type of person that are out there and listening. What are the sorts of jobs and roles you see then within sustainability? Again, we talked before about the specialists and also consulting types, but could you just sort of paint a picture of the types of individuals and actually particularly where you can see people with a biodiversity leaning kind of fitting into the piece?
Absolutely. So I think the closest to me would be the consulting type jobs, and I think within that space, there's a space for the generalist sustainability professionals. So people start studying. I mean, I studied local economic development, so that very much looking at geography and environment and the impact on that on development. That doesn't necessarily kind of push me into one specific vertical, but naturally, kind of I'm more of a generalist, as I said before, with interest in certain topics. Then within consulting, even there's a space for those very kind of, in a way, experienced people on certain topics. So as I said, a biodiversity specialist, there's definitely a space for them within a consulting job, because today what we're saying is, depending on the nature of the client and the organization that we're working with, they need deep expertise on certain topics to help them transform some of the areas they want to look into. So there's definitely a space within that consulting business context. Now, also there's obviously industry. So actually joining organizations as either a head of sustainability for some of those industry companies, whether it's in consumer, automotive, in financial services, etc. Within the industry, I would say absolutely there's a kind of a head of sustainability role, but then in my field, let's say within sourcing and procurement, there's also a big demand here for some technical sustainability people to kind of be able to bring sustainability into demand planning, into responsible sourcing. Because I think traditionally as well, sourcing and procurement people, the key metrics and performance metrics have been around spend and, is it inexpensive or not? So they often source based on that, based on how quickly they can get the product, how cheaply, and then the quality of the product. Mm-hmm. Now, this sourcing and procurement is a very critical function within an organization, because this is where a lot of the buying happens. Mm-hmm. And in order for you to buy green and buy responsibly, you need people within those teams really who understand, what are we looking for in that product for it to be something that we're happy to buy and use and consume, for it to be aligned to our green agenda. And I find there's definitely a massive opportunity to combine, especially for biodiversity, deforestation, nature, forestry kind of SMEs and specialists to sit in that sourcing and procurement teams, whether in industry or even in consulting.
Yeah, interesting. It sounds big. It sounds diverse. It sounds complicated as well, the sort of the industry and how it's developing, but there's certainly opportunities out there, and probably more than people realize by the sound of things. Like, what advice would you give someone who's listening, who wants to find out more about the sustainability industry and where they might be able to sort of fit in, either as a graduate job seeker or as someone, working mid-career and looking to, transfer their skills and experiences into this? Have you got any idea about how people can sort of navigate their options?
Absolutely. And I've actually recently come across a colleague that has done that pivot very freshly. And right. One of the key things that I see people doing at the moment, even within, to be honest, within within Deloitte, yep. People moving from very far in, like from cyber into, so that shift, what I'm saying is people are doing a bit of personal investment in education. Right. So, whether, and I know, Nick, probably within your audience, there might be people who are studying sustainability or biodiversity already. And there might be, as you say, those that are looking to switch. And I think in order to do that switch, there's a lot of content and knowledge out there, free resources online. But where I've seen people are doing that kind of a serious, they need a serious, or they really want to move on and do that pivot. They're enrolling themselves in some courses, or doing a master's, or doing a bit of knowledge kind of sessions or learning to kind of get them a bit more comfortable with the topic. Yep. That is one. The other thing is connections. Where I've seen even things that I've experienced personally is, on some of the platforms. So I would say LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. I've seen a lot of people just, sharing a lot of great content, and sometimes people get in touch and you start with a conversation, and then things move quickly just because it's the right time, the right market. So I would definitely encourage a bit of more, proactive push. Not necessarily through traditional lenses. Sometimes just try to kind of find a right person with an organization that you're very interested in, or you're very inspired by their story, and just get in touch and see, if you can grab a coffee with them. From a kind of applying for jobs and internships, I think internships is a great also other kind of channel that people can use to kind of understand what's out there and decide what options or what they want to go for. I mean, graduate jobs, or even, Deloitte, we've got an intranet. I'm sure for a lot of organizations, there's a lot of them, the kind of job portals that they can access and apply there. Yeah. So there's a lot out there. And I guess, I think it all comes to sometimes, finding where you want to start, where is that topic of sustainability that you want to maybe do a bit push on, and finding people in the space that are passionate about it and speak to them. Yeah,
that's great advice. Yeah. And it's interesting you're saying about, where do you want to start? So I actually wanted to talk about your career and your journey as well, and how you got to where you are. But where did your passion for this come from? Was this sort of seeded early in your life, or is this something that's developed, more recently? Like, you're clearly passionate about it. Where's that come from?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I would say, so, since well, I mean, I go back to my school years. So I'm Lebanese. So I moved to the UK only 10 years ago for my master's in economic development. But previous to that, my interest, I was, working and super passionate about the S in the ESG. So the more social sustainability. So human rights, gender equality was definitely the area I focused on. So I used to work in local NGOs and with international NGOs about the space. So creating space for young people, for access to education. And for me, education was always a key developmental tool to help people kind of get access to better jobs or better space, better working environment, etc. So passion started quite early on in schools where I used to represent kind of our class on certain kind of sustainability conferences and within the S, I would say, of the ESG. But then when I wanted to study economics and when I came to the UK, I think the kind of, my interest has broadened to kind of think a bit more about sustainability, and particularly with the kind of impact of the S on the E, and realizing that they don't live separate. So today, any environmental disaster has a massive impact on people and communities. So for me, these two things became quite hand in hand. And
by S and E, sorry, you mean sustainability and economics? Am I guessing right?
Sorry, I the bad thing about Deloitte people is they use a lot of acronyms that no one understands. It's environmental and social.
Right, thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, when I talk about ESG, it's very much environmental, social, and governance. Right. And for me, when we talk about environmental sustainability, so think about the impact of climate change, of environmental disaster, water scarcity. All of that is absolutely, at the end of the day, has impact on those communities that are based in those places. So I've just realized that I cannot be kind of only thinking and focusing about the S or the social sustainability. And yeah, in the last 10 years, Nick, whilst I did a bit of kind of, not 100%, I would true to myself, not 100% of my time in the last 10 years was dedicated to sustainability. Yeah. And in the last few years, I've made a personal decision within my current organization and beyond to be fully aligned to this topic and to spend personally 100% of my time talking and working on this topic. And that's why I've done a bit of a small pivot within the firm to be part of the sustainability practice.
And how's that working out?
Oh, incredible. Yeah. I mean, at a personal level, and I think aligning my passion to what I want to be and where I see myself in the next 10 years, absolutely, this is the right space. And you just surround yourself with incredibly smart and passionate people, and you just see yourself constantly learning. I'm on a journey, definitely. And I feel like there's so much I still need to learn. But yeah, it's a really great space and very, you're always surrounded by inspirational people, which helps.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Yeah. Where do you see your career going then? I'm not going to say what's your 5 or 10 year plan, but you're obviously excited about where things are going as well. Like, where do you see your career and things evolving into the future?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, in the last couple of years, I've done this big jump and focus on sustainability. Yeah. And probably without being careful not to overshare, I am making a small move in the next few weeks, but I'm not going too far. From a topic perspective, I am still, in a way, pushing and want to grow myself in the sustainable value chain space. Yeah. So in the next years, really, my ultimate goal is to kind of bring my consulting, my industry, and hands-on knowledge and understanding of how kind of supply chains work, to be able to really bring the best solutions and the best ideas to businesses I work with around this topic. So I see myself growing within the sustainability within supply chain space. Yeah. And I know I've got a lot of learning still to do. So I'm so excited to what comes next in terms of like certain SMEs or certain specialization within sustainability topics, but yeah, definitely within the supply chain space.
Yeah, interesting. Well, good luck with that. That sounds great. And one thing you've mentioned a few times though is learning. This is obviously something you're really interested in. Professional development, learning.
Yeah.
Yeah, going deeper on stuff, getting better, improving. Like, how do you find time and space for learning? Because I know when you're in a busy world, and I'm sure Deloitte and your work is a busy world, we value your time here today. Like, how do you set time aside to really sit down and kind of, learn new skills and new knowledge?
That's a great question. And I mean, maybe it's never enough the time I have to do that. But the good thing about working in this space is that you learn on the go. And that is, thinking about when I was not spending 100% of my time on this topic, this was what I'm feeling is like by me working 100% of my time on this topic, I'm constantly exposed to new client challenges, new problems, new questions that push me to go and actually create the time for it. So what I would say is just me being in this role allows me to constantly learning, because the topics of conversations are all about this. I'm constantly monitoring the regulations, legislations, new rules on this topic to be able to bring to my clients and make sure that they are aware of the expectations of them. So I am pushed to learn. The other thing is, and something I've decided to do with my partner, actually, to dedicate half a day on a Sunday for personal development in this space. So we spend 4 hours, as much as we can. Obviously, I cannot like brag that it's every Sunday, but it's few hours for us to just read on things that we love and create that space. And probably having both of us make us more accountable to each other. So we just sit down and read. So that is my self-development time.
Oh, that's great. That's really nice. You got that structure and you're being supported by your partner too, and they're doing it as well. I love it. Great. Oh, well, it's been really, really interesting and fascinating to get to know you and to hear a bit more about your work. Often at the end, we sort of ask a kind of broader question just to kind of hear a bit about how you think. And what I'd love to ask you is, like, if I could make you a sustainability czar for the day, and you had a power to enact a law or a decree or whatever it might be that would make the world a more sustainable place, and it could be anything, what do you think you might choose to do?
Wow, that is a big question, Nick. I
know, I'm sorry.
No worries. My mind is just traveling and thinking, where do I focus? Because
what are you thinking?
I mean, in my mind, I go immediately to, whilst I have a lot of passion on human rights and I want to focus there, but biggest kind of threat today is climate change and the impact of that. So, and I would go to our biggest emitters and industries there and, cutting fossil fuels and reliance on coal and going fully solar. So if I can accelerate the route to kind of renewables and getting everyone on board, I think that would be my biggest priority.
Wonderful. That'd be great. And it feels like things are moving in that direction already.
Yeah.
But let's speed it up. Brilliant. Yeah. Well, Tara, it's been wonderful again talking to you. If people want to find out a little bit more about you and your work or the wider work within sustainability in Deloitte, where should we send them?
I mean, please get in touch with me. I'm on LinkedIn. Also, I'm happy if I'm not the right person, I'm happy to connect you and introduce you to the right people, whether at Deloitte or out of Deloitte. The good thing about this space is you just get connected to a lot of people from across industries. So please get in touch. LinkedIn would be best at this stage, and then I can share more information. Yeah.
That's great. Okay. Once again, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
No problem. Thank you, Nick, for having me.
Okay. Well, I hope you enjoyed that, everyone. If you did, then please do hit the subscribe button to get notified of new episodes as they drop. And also please give us a rating or a review, because it really helps us to get in front of more people. Now, if you want our help to get clear and get started and get hired as a professional conservationist, I recommend you enroll in our free online training program, exploring how to get a conservation job. So if you're a student, a job seeker, or a career switcher, you'll learn the golden rule about how to get started, the key mistakes to avoid, and also we'll answer your biggest questions. You can check that out at conservation-careers.com/free. See you soon.